Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Finance and Performance Policy and Scrutiny Committee on Monday, the 9th of June. Before we proceed, I'll go through the usual housekeeping tips. Could you please ensure that your mobile phones and devices are either switched to mute or silent to avoid any disturbance and disruption. There are no fire drills envisaged for this evening, so if there's a fire alarm, it's for real. Fire exits are over there, and the assembly point is at the Linen Cross pub outside. This evening, I'd like to welcome Director of Finance and Resource, Tom Bradley, also his number 2, Sam Wilson, and also Jack Case. And for later on, I'd also like to welcome Andrew Smith and Liz Williams. Thank you for coming. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. We have apologies from...
Sorry, we have apologies from Councillor Chris Frank, Councillor Nick Grant, Councillor Warwick Hellawell and Councillor Victoria Finnegan.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the last meeting held on the 6th of May, one of the shortest on record. This is to approve the minutes of the meeting as mentioned. Can we take it that the minutes are an accurate record or are there any corrections? Councillor Livingston.
Sorry about this. There are 2 actions on the minutes. On page 4, the Director of Resources agreed that he would provide members with an update on the level amount of fraud associated with the schemes. And members were keen to ensure that financial support was targeted towards those most in need of Director of Resources, was asked to look at other local authority schemes to establish the cost of those discretionary schemes to the organisation to give any difficulties account and update the committee at the next meeting, which must be this meeting.
Sorry, there seems to be some confusion here. Are we talking about the actions from the last meeting? Or are we talking about the minutes?
The actions from the last meeting.
So we're doing the minutes at the moment. Item 2.
No, okay, I'll bring it back up in the next.
Sorry.
Okay.
You're ahead of yourself. So item 2, which is the minutes, these are true and accurate record, and if they are, can I sign them? Can I have a proposer and seconder? Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Livingston, all in agreement? Thank you. Right, item 3, actions from the last meeting. This is the new meeting. This is the new item that we have added to the agendas on both committees for the future to reflect, as it does at parish council level meetings, an update or follow up on actions pertaining from the previous meeting so that we don't forget, because we could. I'm sure officers wouldn't, but we might. The first one is planning and building control key performance indicators, and the documents pertaining to the performance indicators were circulated prior to the meeting. I take it you all read the documents, so are there any questions or issues that you wish to raise at this point or to feedback? Thank you. Councillor Livingston.
The actions are not from the last meeting, they're from the meeting before the last meeting. Okay, and the actions from the last meeting should be in the agenda under item 3, which are in the minutes, which we've just approved.
Just trying to process that one momentarily. So what you're saying is the performance indicators come from the meeting, the penultimate meeting, so to speak, so shouldn't really be here. Okay. So, but they were raised at the last meeting, so maybe you can comment.
I understand, Councillor Livingstone, you are correct that it was something that was raised at the probably the last meeting of the previous overview and scrutiny committee, and I believe it was discussed at the last finance and performance meeting briefly as well, and that's part of the reason that agenda item 3 has been added to the agenda to make sure those matters aren't lost. So yes, to a degree you're right, and this is part of us trying to tie up those loose ends, if that's okay.
I appreciate the efforts of trying to tidy it up, but we also need to make sure that the outstanding issues from the minutes, which are going to be approved, are also included in there in the future. And there's 2 outstanding items that need to be on there.
I think that is in the intention of item 3 in the agenda, basically. So basically, in the minutes of FR 11, the Director of Resources confirmed he would make further inquiries to planning officers regarding an update for councillors on KPIs for planning. So I guess one of those we'll bring up in a minute, possibly. But I get the point you're making, I think. The second one is the item on council tax business rates, housing benefit discretionary rate scheme, which we are due to receive a brief update from the Director of Resources. Over to you, Dom.
Thank you. So we talked about last time, didn't we, about the customers on council tax reduction scheme who have savings, and more specifically, we were looking at those between 6,000 and 10,000 and whether we wanted to adjust any of those thresholds in consideration for next year. So I said I'd go away and ask the Revs and Bens team exactly what numbers we're actually talking about here. And there are 19 claims in total that are affected by this sort of savings out of around about 3,100 customers. So I quickly did the maths, it's 0.6%, so it's fairly small. And what we haven't done is an in-depth analysis of if we had changed our threshold, what would that have impacted each individual customer? Because what we did find out once we did a little bit of investigation was a number of those customers changed from being in work and out of work, and we were talking about having different levels for those in work, say £6,000, and those out of work at £10,000. The long and the short of it, in the opinion of Revs and Bens and my own opinion, is that this could cause an awful lot of work for very few customers. And in terms of the admin costs of doing that and applying some sort of manual process or putting in a system change for that seems disproportional to the number of people that are actually affected by this. And the other sort of point is actually it would have minimal impact probably on each individual person involved. So I'll put it back to you, if we wanted to discuss now or later, whether to actually make any change for something that's only going to affect 19 customers.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it'd be pertinent for me to comment, considering I was the main antagonist in spearheading the conversation there. Thank you for feedback on that. Really
Protagonist. Not antagonist.
long day. Thank you. Yes. I appreciate the work you've undertaken to look into it. I have to say I agree with you in your assessment. It's negligible. It's a lot less than I would have expected, but it's helpful to know these things, because at the time we weren't aware of of how many it may affect, for example. So it was good to go away and do that work. So now you've come back with the information that you have. I would agree with your assessment that it's a non-starter in my opinion, but obviously others may have different thoughts. But it's not worth pursuing, clearly. Thank you.
The second thing that I was asked to have a look at was around the fraud investigations and the numbers and the types of different frauds in the service, in terms of the cases that we are managing, rather than the Revs and Bens being fraudulent. So fraud is handled, I suppose, primarily by the Department of Work and Pensions and their investigations, rather than at a local level. So at a local level, we see things and we refer it to the DWP. And the DWP do their investigation and quite often don't tell us any outputs from that. It's obviously a big government machine. They don't talk to us on an individual case-by-case level. But what they do sometimes send through are actions that we then process for that, and we then amend claims for that outcome. We don't get numbers from the DWP directly that link into our referrals to them. So we refer a handful of them, and it does vary depending on what time of the year it is. But it might be, half a dozen one month, and it might be one the next. So it's not, we're not talking huge numbers that we spot and refer. And the DWP doesn't then come back on those 6, 7, 10 cases specifically. So it's just information in, and then sometimes information out that we then process. So it's difficult to know exactly how many of our referrals then are, actioned as errors or fraud. But the other thing that the Revs and Bens teams were keen to point out was obviously we have our own internal audit of processes, so robust processes and procedures to minimise error. And we also take part in all the things like the National Fraud Initiative, that's a sort of a government run process that covers benefits, it covers council tax, it covers payroll, and it's triangulating data and sometimes pops up with hits for us to investigate locally. And we do all those things. And we also do our own, anti-fraud work as well. So it's worth reminding ourselves that we do a single person discount review annually and ad hoc during the year as well, where we might suspect. And we try and do that as regularly as resourcing allows, but definitely once a year. And that quite often uncovers people who forget to tell us things.
Any other questions or on the update? No? Thank you, Dom. Next item on the agenda is item 4, which is declarations of members' interests. Are there any declarations to be made now? Move on. Announcements. There are no announcements from the Chief Executive, who's on holiday this week. Been asked basically to flag in that because our role has changed slightly, even though it was always there, but now it's overt rather than covert, that in formulating policy, we may not have all the data and information available. It doesn't impact us today, but in the future, when we're looking at policy, we may have to do examinations and stuff with a paucity of data, which might be challenging, which would be interesting, won't it? Thought I'd flag that in. What's really positive is I'm glad to say there were quite a few number of questions submitted to officers beforehand. I'd like to thank everybody who did that. It's really good. I hope that the answers to your questions will be woven into the not spiel, into the feedback. Sorry, into the feedback that you will get from officers. And basically, I will hand out. You'll find it in what Dom, Sam, and Jack will report to you on. So I'll hand over to the team. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report contains the finance and performance outturn for 2024-25. I echo the Chairman when I say thank you for the responses that we've received in advance, and where possible.
Councillor Livingston jumped the gun and so did I. So can I just pause a minute?
Yeah.
Item 6, resolution calling decisions. There weren't any. Responses from full council or cabinet. Item 7, there weren't any. So we're back with Sam now. Thank you.
I did wonder what I was. I was like, I'm waiting for 8, and I didn't hear it, but I'm not saying anything else.
Item 8.
Thank you.
Apologies.
So where possible, I have weaved the responses into my presentation of this report. And as it is a rather detailed report, I've discussed the revenue and capital items, and then I'll take any further questions before I cover the section on reserves, and then finally I'll hand over to Jacqueline, who will cover the performance elements. So on revenue, we had an operational surplus of just over £500,000 after allowing for our budget carry forwards. The budgets that we carried forward into 25-26 are 30k for projects in communications and environmental sustainability. These projects were delayed because of contract issues, or the procurement exercise was more technical than the officers realised at the time. After the budget's introduced in year and those carried forward from the year before, the funding position is a 300k surplus. This surplus will be used to top up the transformation fund, which I will discuss later when I mention the reserves. So whilst the surplus is good news, this does include savings of 400k from the pay offer, which, if you recall, earlier on in the year, the pay offer was budgeted higher than we were actually paid. So there was 400k savings there. A quick summary of the additional income and in-year savings. So we had additional income from investment properties, which were rent reviews and lets, additional income from planning and additional income on treasury investments. We had savings from the reduction in the cost of HVO fuel on our fleet of vehicles, and vacant posts, savings from vacant posts across various departments. So these departments include building control and planning. There's also been the usual staff turnover in health and wellbeing and parking, and in legal and comms we have recruited staff to part-time to full-time posts, so there's budget savings there. And whilst it may seem that departments have been running adequately throughout the year, I don't think my grey hair tells me to say, there is a desire to speed up council performance on projects, especially in light of local government reorganisation. So that means that the recruitment to vacant posts will continue as budgeted. When it comes to additional expenditure, I have to mention that the Revenues and Benefits Service exceeded its budget by 700k due to pressures on the ability to recover benefit overpayments whilst the working age cases migrate over to universal credit. There is an increased cost and number of supported accommodation in the district, and this restricts the subsidy that the council can claim from the government. And there's also been an increase in the contract fees for administering the service, such as for staff costs. These financial pressures are expected to continue, and the council will need to monitor these closely and take action, or may have to take further action in the coming years. On the capital, so we spent 10.2, which was 70.2% of the budget in the year, which is in line with last year. There were 8 projects that were delayed for external reasons. So we had delays to vehicle deliveries, on the lead times. On the housing fund, one of the properties failed to complete by the end of the year. Oakhurst substation, we're waiting for requirements on a new tenant. And Swan Walk capital contribution, we're awaiting on some works to be completed before we can hand that over to the new owners. There are delays on internal projects, such as rural car parks improvements and the Carfax and Black Horse Way, due to internal capacity where officers focused on the office move. And these works are not urgent and do not result in a financial return, so there's no financial loss. In the Q3 meeting, I mentioned about 37 Bishopbrick, and there not being any works done there, but there has now been some movement on the works to relet. They're still not complete, but a tenant has not yet moved in. 4 projects overspent in the year, and these are summarised on page 16 of the pack. And any particular questions on revenue and capital?
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I had a quick question on section 1.4 of the financial performance report relating to the loss of income relating to neighbourhood plans as a result of the delayed local plan.
So Paul asked this question as well, so I was just finding the answer. So I suppose it's a loss of income because we're not receiving the grants that we do, but the workload is absorbed by the team. So we're not having an additional cost we're not saving any money anywhere by not receiving the money. But we do usually get about £20,000 per neighbourhood plan referendum that we would run, which we haven't received.
Thank you very much.
If I can ask a supplement on that, on the same topic then, does that mean that there are still funds in the system for people to do neighbourhood plans and go ahead with neighbourhood plans or not?
I would have to refer to planning colleagues, right? Unless Dom knows. No.
Okay, sorry. Any, Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of probably semantic questions, really. On 1.3, I didn't fully understand the increased cost and number of supported accommodations restricting the amount of subsidy the council can claim from the government. It almost sounds as if we have increased costs and more claims coming in, we claim less from the government. Perhaps you could clarify that one first.
So you're right, it's a double whammy. So the cost is going up of these supported accommodations, and there are more and more of them. So we've been hit twice by it, but government caps the amount of subsidy that they give us, and therefore we can't claim extra money despite that. So the gap is effectively growing between the two.
Okay, that's clear enough. Thank you. Cap being the important word. Secondly, in 1.6, you talk about a loss of income share at Stenning Leisure Centre, and due to a change in agreement from West Sussex County Council to an academic school. I'm not quite sure how to read that. Does that mean West Sussex have an agreement with an academy school and it's changed and we get less money?
So we had an agreement with West Sussex to share the charge for that area. The school then went to an academy school, and the West Sussex didn't mention when it was transferred over to the academy this arrangement that we had, and we didn't invoice them and have a contact there, so it wasn't raised with them.
So we're not getting any money for that.
At the moment, no. Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave that one there. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Chair. Just two real quick points. Just want to follow up on the question Councillor Croker just asked. Do we know, in terms of value, the figure that we're currently missing out on in terms of that income stream? And just a second question. It was something that Sam mentioned in a little update. Nothing bad, don't worry. Just regarding staff turnover and health and well-being, it's just really a question for my own understanding. Is it due to temporary contracts or another reason? Just really a point of curiosity, really. Thank you.
So the income share is about £40,000 per year, but it goes back a couple of years. We had been accruing it in the hope of negotiating with the academy school, but that didn't get anywhere, and we've decided to write that back now. And health and wellbeing. I mean, it's more staff turnover in general, but they have had a vacancy for the whole of the year on their alcohol, which is why I keep looking at Jacqueline. on their alcohol posts. But obviously, where there are vacancies, we do sometimes have agency to cover those as well. But
Councillor Emery?
Thank you, Chairman. In reference to sections 1.16 to 1.19 in relation to the costs of Albury House, I noticed from 1.16 that there was a slight overspend against budget, so 2.329 spent rather than 2.25 million. I noticed in 1.18 that the costs for moving are slightly below budget. I'm interested in 1.19. Is it possible to provide us with details of the amount of money we saved in reference to 1.19 in terms of the costs that would have been incurred had we remained at Parkside for the decarbonisation? Because effectively, yeah, we didn't incur those costs, but we've incurred the costs in respect to 1.16 instead of. So how much did we actually save?
So that's how long's a piece of string? Because we don't know what we would have spent or the county would have spent on making things a better environmental output. So the EPC rating there was very poor. Can't remember exactly. Was it G or F or E or something? An E. They would have had to have made it a D or a C or a B across the years towards the end of the decade. And therefore, how much would that have cost? We don't know. We can estimate in millions rather than, thousands. Okay. And therefore, our share of that would have been X amount, but it could be anything.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Chair. just a question regarding another question regarding the office move. So, as I understand it, the plan is that the new offices here at Albury House will pay back over a 15-year period. As I understand it, that could be accelerated by letting out the vacant space on a commercial basis that we currently have available. Has any modelling been done on if that's let out at commercial current commercial rate, what that would bring down the time frame for payback on the investment? Essentially, is there any modelling that's been done on that at all to give an indication of how much more quickly that would bring down the return? Thank you.
So I do recall doing an exercise. This was probably about 12 months ago, so forgive me if it's not wholly accurate, but in my mind I have something like 12 years in the back of my mind. So it does bring it down a little bit. Obviously we wouldn't be renting out a massive proportion of the building, and therefore the income's not going to be enormous, but it will chip away at that much quicker.
So about 3 years on average, give or take.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I can find out a more precise answer for you.
Councillor Landry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question for my own information, really. 1.9, debts over 90 days are ageing, but the result has been reduced by £270,000 in the last few weeks. What is the total of this aged debt?
So today the total of our age debt is 1.3 million. Are you talking about the age debt that we
From developers?
from developers? I don't know the exact figure. I'll have to come back to you, but there is 1.1 million due today at over 90 days.
Of all debt?
Of all debt, yeah.
On a supplementary on one of my hobby horses, in view one of the things that Jack said, basically if the post is vacant for some time and it's not filled by a contractor or something, then do we need the post? I think it's a question which I raised before. And I realise the comment that you said about we're asking for more and more to be done, which is a fair point, and we can get contractors to do it. But I mean, what I'm saying is, do we look at these things critically?
Yes, we do. It depends in which area and whether it's critical to the business or not. And you can obviously sometimes rearrange things on a more temporary basis to get by for 2-3 months, etc. But actually that has a big strain on things, and quite often then something else doesn't get done. So we are rearranging where we can carefully, bringing in agency to get us over a short-term amount. Sometimes we go out to advert for posts and we can't find the right candidates and the right person for that role. Sometimes we have to go out again or a third time, and sometimes then we do get it. Sometimes we don't. We change our decision and restructure something slightly differently. So it's a bit of a case by case. But you're absolutely right. It's my role, isn't it, to challenge people to say, do we actually need to spend that? And that is one of the questions I undoubtedly ask, as my colleagues probably will testify.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on item 8? Councillor Walters.
Sorry, it's just a point of clarity. Where we were talking about the amount of money owed to us from debtors, is that in this table on the right of page 21?
Yes.
Any chance you might be able to refer to those sort of things in the future?
Yeah, I did have a bit here, but yeah, I think I've answered the questions that there were.
No more for any more? No? Well, Sam, shall we move on? Part 2?
Part 2 of 3. So this is transformation and reserves. So page 29 of the pack shows a breakdown of our reserves of the transformation. So we spent 260k in 24-25, and this will be topped back up to £500,000 using the surplus from 24-25. And the appendix also details the 25-26 transformation that we have got planned so far. Earmark reserves. So we have an opening balance on our earmark reserves of just under 25 million and a closing balance of just under 24 million. So the difference is 1.18 million. In the year, we used the capital environment and infrastructure reserve to fund the initial works on the Capital Theatre. We've used the cost of living reserve, the transformation fund, as I previously mentioned, and we've used some of the planning delivery grant that we received in the prior year on our water neutrality project. So that's why those reserves have gone down. I've received a few questions regarding community infrastructure levy and section 106 amounts and whether they are shown within this appendix. So smaller amounts of section 106 for leisure and recycling are held within the earmark reserves on the table, along with the community infrastructure levy administration income. And when projects are identified, these reserves are used. Larger amounts of CIL and grants received that do not have any conditions attached are shown on the balance sheet as capital grants and contributions received. They are not included in the appendix. However, during the year, we received just over 1.2 million in CIL contributions with no conditions, and we spent just over £250,000 of that amount. And I'll make sure it's included in future years for you. And then where there are conditions to section 106 receipts, such as affordable housing, these amounts are shown as long-term liabilities on the balance sheet because they may need to be repaid if we don't meet the conditions. And finally, I can't finish without mentioning the medium-term financial strategy and general fund reserves. So as mentioned previously, there are budget pressures with revenues and benefits, as well as the future MTFS identifying budget gaps, increasing to 3.6 million in 2029-30. We are expecting a multi-year settlement announcement at some point this year, which will help with financial planning, but there's also a business rates baseline reset, which out of consultation, I think the consultation closed last week. This may affect the amount of business rates that we can retain. So currently we assume a 2.2 million retention of those amounts. Then we don't know how much we'll get, but we're expecting a transitional period on that amount as well. So any questions?
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Oddly enough, it's still. You said there was a certain amount that we have spent this year, and I'm sorry I missed the number. That's the first question.
It's about £250,000.
£250,000, okay. Is that still money spent by Horsham directly, or does that include the amount that goes to parishes?
So the amount for parishes is held on the balance sheet. From recollection, that's we hold about 700,000 for the parishes. That would be passed to them to spend.
Okay, so that didn't include the number you said, right? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hogman.
Thank you, Chair. Appendix D, earmarks reserves. There's been I think I'm reading it right, £1 million in inflation reserve for the past 3 years. Could I ask when that £1 million went in, and when we think that inflation may be stable enough to reduce that particular figure, and how that compares to other councils? Because obviously it does appear just to be £1 million sitting in reserve that hasn't been touched for a few years. Thank you.
Exactly when it went in, I think it might have been 21 or 22, just as inflation started to rocket, and we did get some extra money through the COVID years. Government was actually relatively generous in those periods, and we earmarked that off for inflation. Obviously, inflation is now coming down, and I have been talking to the Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources about what we do with that fund. There are some things that are lurking that will emerge in place of that, of course, and one of them some IFRS technical jargon that Sam would be much better placed to talk about rather than me. But in layman's terms, which is what I deal in, we may need to provide against some of our pooled funds, and for the capital loss or paper loss, in fact, because we wouldn't necessarily sell it, but when it's valued or revalued downwards, some of that will now start having to hit our I&E effectively. So having a provision against that would smooth that, so the taxpayer doesn't have to pay in 1 year because the value's dropped, and in the next year, we get the surplus. So it would be used as a sort of an equalisation fund, and therefore we could take that £1 million off and use it for that purpose instead. So there's always a use for this sort of money. We could either put that into general reserve. It doesn't really matter where it sits because it's there to be used, isn't it? But I suspect now, yes, you're absolutely right. Calling it an inflation reserve is probably no longer necessary, albeit who knows what Donald Trump's going to say next week, and the world could collapse, and we might actually need it again as inflation rockets.
Any other comments? I asked the question about COVID. We've got 2 or 3 items on COVID. Maybe you can just fill us in on that, because it's quite strange to see COVID hanging around, even though it's still out there.
So these amounts are the COVID discretionary grants is shown there because there has been movement in the year. We had some debts raised that we successfully passed over to government, and the movement there. So the 40 in, and there's 20 come out in the current year, and then there's been the 20 agreement to take. They'll take on the other 20k now, and then we are going to analyse the balance that's left and check the conditions for those and what we can do with them, potentially reallocate those, or they would need to be paid back to government.
And the management fund?
The management fund, I will need to come back to you on that one.
Thanks, Sam. It's just strange to see COVID hanging around in the paperwork. Any other questions on this item before we enter phase 3? Over to you, Jack.
So I'll also break my section down into 2 parts just to make it easier for me to structure. So I'll go through KPIs to start with, we'll do any questions, and then I will talk about the annual plan, outturn, and major projects. So the KPI appendix covers both the end of year position and our Q4 position. Because the report's quite detailed, I'll focus on the end of year position, but we'll happily take questions on both of them. So our annual overview shows that 5 KPIs were red, 6 which were amber, and 16 which were green. It's worth just noting in those that our national planning KPIs are not included in those figures because they're not yet finalised, and I'll bring them here as they become finalised. And the same applies to our recycling rates. As you may have noticed, we report those a quarter behind because that's when we get hold of that data. And once again, they've been finalised. I'll bring them as a separate item. So in terms of our annual position, there's a few questions came in, so I'll try and cover those. There's some questions around the number of antisocial behaviour reviews and the fact that sits at red. So whilst it is showing as red, that's a comparison to last year. The team have spent this year actively promoting antisocial behaviour reviews as an avenue for residents to support them. Therefore, that rise doesn't necessarily mean a rise in antisocial behaviour, but a rise of that process being used by residents. And luckily, we've got Andrew here, so if you've got any questions on that, I will hand them over. The other one of note is our local authority error rate. We continue to report that KPI as red, although you will notice that it is sitting below the threshold of 0.4. Because that's still our pre-audit figure, any errors identified during the audit are likely to take us over the threshold. So the red rating remains, and that's consistent with our corporate risk register as well. Under our right time combined speed of processing for new claims and changes of circumstances, we talk about a difficult year, and we were asked about what the meaning of that was. So in terms of that, the volume has gone up for the department. We've talked about recruitment and retention of permanent staff, and the use of reliance on temporary staff can make that kind of business as usual more challenging. At the same time as all of those other things are going on, the service is trying to become more efficient, and that's quite hard to deliver whilst doing the day-to-day job. And this is to try and keep a lid on the rising salary costs. In terms of the number of health and wellbeing interventions, over the course of the year, we've put a note on that KPI saying that the figure often rises after we report. So whilst that's been reported to you over the year as generally being between amber and red and green, it's kind of gone up and down. When all our final data has come in, we're pleased to say that we actually can report that as a green annual KPI. In terms of Q4, we received a question about the number of volunteers referred through the to the voluntary sector support service. We just wanted to clarify that the demand for volunteers remains quite high, but we are getting less people volunteering, and then we often will end up with maybe one person phoning in about multiple volunteer positions, and we only may refer on for the most appropriate one of those positions. So I think that is our KPIs. Are there any questions on KPIs?
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, but I'll start with the abandoned incoming calls KPI. So I know that refers to calls ringing off before an officer is able to pick up and assist them. I know that on many occasions customers will ring back later on and try again, and some will go online and find out what they need to do that way. However, I'd be interested to know do we know how many customers who may have not gotten through to our call centre and not rung back, for example, do we know how many have been able to resolve their issues potentially online? Because I know that some of course, there'll be some people that ring in because they just prefer to speak to somebody and they could do it online. But there'll also be other scenarios where the situation is more complicated than that, and something where they might need some advice from someone on the end of the phone who will be able to guide them and advise them on the best way to go about a situation, for example. So I was just really looking for clarification on that, if that's any information we do hold at all. Thank you.
I don't think we collect the data for that particular scenario. If people want to phone back, then they'll find a quieter time and get through. So,
if I just come back on that one, Chair, I see what you mean to an extent. However, I also have to keep in mind that our call centre hours are particularly limited for people to call to speak to somebody. It's 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. I think it is. So
for revenues and benefits, yes, it is 10 till 2. Obviously, our contact lines for the council itself, 9 till 5.
Come back? Or are you done?
yeah, I get it. I do understand where you're coming from. You know, I'm not saying, you know, for every single call that comes in that they need to necessarily speak to somebody. It was just more of a more of a point of clarification on whether or not we did have any data on how many people did. But obviously, you've answered that question. If I could just move on really quickly, I've got one other question on the volunteer referrals KPI. Obviously, we know it's a big problem at the moment. There's a lot less people who are willing to volunteer or can volunteer because people are having to work longer hours, work multiple jobs. People that may have had, you know, time in the evening, for example, no longer have that luxury anymore, and it is a big issue. what kind of what approach are we taking to trying to actively recruit volunteers? Do we do any work, for example, outreach work with local faith and community groups? Do we do any pop-up kind of stalls around the district, for example, especially in peak footfall areas around the district? Just different things where people who may not generally engage with us willingly it may be something they come across while they're running errands or other things in their free time, and gives them the opportunity to see what they could volunteer for and the opportunities that are there for them. So it's just really a clarification on that, if you will. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may just respond. Yes, I mean, Councillor Jeffrey, we do as much as we can with the team that we've got, and we have sort of 2 officers that work in our voluntary support service, and certainly they engage along with the community development team to promote volunteering wherever possible. One significant event that happens every year is the volunteer awards that occurred last week, where we saw a whole range of volunteers and volunteering organisations at the Slimfold Golf and Country Club, or Golf and Fitness Club, should I say, receive awards. Very well attended, very well sort of publicised. The issue is that less and less people are able to volunteer, and one thing that was striking at last week's event was that there were a considerable number of senior people who've been volunteering for years and doing a fantastic job, but some real youngsters coming through as well. The kind of middle ground is where we're not seeing people volunteering, I think because of the time constraints and the pressures. But certainly with a limited team members who work 150%, we're doing everything we can in those areas that you mentioned to promote those volunteering opportunities.
Any other questions? Councillor Ellis-Brown?
Going back to the incoming calls abandonment rate, meeting Jacqueline on Friday, I think we might want to consider time to abandonment, not the number of calls that have been abandoned, because that would be helpful in our resource planning. So it's something we may wish to consider. And what we might find then is that the RAG might move from red to amber or indeed green.
Councillor Knowles?
Thank you, Chair. On the incoming calls abandonment, when I call my doctors for an appointment, if there are more than 10 people in the queue, there's a message that says press star or something, and you will be called back. Could we look at operating a system similar to that? It's just tech.
I know that we are looking, so I have monthly meetings with the Revs and Vens team, and it has been raised that there is, and this isn't calls abandoned, this is people unable to get through because at the beginning of the month everyone wants to ring up and pay their council tax and the line is busy. We are looking into, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? Brain's gone. We're looking into a pattern there to see how many call, you know, if there's a particular day, and also working with residents in promoting paying online and by direct debit as well, which means that the calls, you know, the lines don't get clogged up with people ringing in. So we will look into that.
Any other questions? Shall we continue?
Okay, so next bit is on our annual plan, out to town and major projects. So at the end of the year, we had 85% of the annual plan was complete. I'll break it down into the areas of the annual plan. So in supporting people and communities, we had 97% of that was complete. The item outstanding here is the housing company development at Duke Square and London Road. Duke Square now has a new plan submitted to planning, and London Road has been assigned new architects. In Inspiring Greener Futures, we're 64% complete. There were no actions here that did not progress at all, and the remaining 10 amber projects here will all be progressing in the 25-26 annual plan. Under Building a Thriving Local Community, we were 100% complete, and under Always Listening, Learning and Improving, we were 87% complete, with 1 amber and 1 red. The red action was our asset management strategy, and initial condition reports are now underway with that. We have 3 projects at the moment that are considered major but were not included in the annual plan. These are either now completed or progressing as expected. The office move was one of those completed projects on page 16 and 17 of your agenda packs. It provides an update on the cost compared to the 2.25 million budget for the move. There was a slight overspend, however, there were savings on existing parkside budgets that offset the additional cost. So any questions? I know that there were some financial questions, of which I'm going to shamelessly hand over to Sam for.
Want to take them now, Sam? Or?
I think they were asked during the revenue bit. We sort of cut out sections and pasted it back together in the wrong way.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Croker?
Thank you, Chair. In 9.1, Inspiring Greener Futures, let's talk about the charge points for the car park at Cowfold and Pavilions, Horsham, awaiting decommissioning. Is that because they were a previous system rather than connected curb? It just seemed a bit odd if we're trying to get more charge points to be decommissioning them. I accept that you might not have the answer to that one directly.
I'm not sure what was decommissioned, but we actually have got connected curb in Billingshurst. So I think there was from memory, I think there was an older system, as you point out.
So I think we might have to come back. It feels a bit like the university challenge, doesn't it? We're all looking at each other. We'll come back to you with a fuller answer.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have asked this earlier, but
You can't ask all questions, they occur to you as you go through the text again. Any other questions for officers at this point? No? Was that it, Jack? Okay, I think that. Sam?
Done.
Tom? Yes. Okay, I think we've done item 8. Next item on the agenda is item 9. This item sits on both O&S committees, mainly because basically Victoria and I agreed, in view of the size of the sum of money that we're talking about, that it should come here. But technically it's part of the place type agenda and communities, so it sits on her portfolio. So essentially what we're going to look at is the financial side of things and financial understanding, and we won't get involved in housing policy. Housing policy is going to be for Wednesday as a reprise match or second round or whatever you want to call it. So I think I'll hand over this to Andrew, and also to Liz Williams if there's any questions. And Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just really to introduce the report very briefly. I have a double blessing this week because I'll be attending both performance and scrutiny meetings. So there we are. That's good, isn't it, for me? So I think the executive summary shows you why we're doing it. Briefly, the context is we are simply not seeing the delivery or the turnover in larger family homes. You would expect through the development process to see a number of 3, some 4-bed homes delivered by housing associations through the planning process every year. That has all but dried up, not just to do with water neutrality, to do with the whole issues facing the social housing sector, which I won't go in this evening. I might go in more on that on Wednesday if members are interested. We're also not seeing the number of voids, new properties to let existing properties from housing associations. It's very slow. We have an increasing number of larger families on our housing register, some with quite complex needs that are sitting on that register, have done for some years, and will sit on that register for quite a few more years. So this is a way of using a quite considerable Section 106 affordable housing reserve to acquire 10 larger family homes on the open market that we can bring into Horsham district homes and let as social housing for families on the register. That's the reason for doing it. It's driven by need, and it's driven to try to meet at least some of the needs of the larger families on our housing register. And so we agreed that there is a budget of £5 million to buy 10 3/4 family homes for those households on the register. So I am happy to take questions, but I'm certainly more than happy for Liz, Sam or Dom to take any of the financial questions. I'm a housing officer.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you for that summary. My question relates to the adaptation of these homes. I'm presuming, which is not a good thing to do, that you've identified a number of families to go straight into these homes once they're purchased. It's the cost of adapting. So not only do we have the cost of purchasing, but it's the cost of adapting that I'm interested in, because I know from experience it's not a cheap option, although there are other funding streams to pay for the adaptations, and other areas within the NHS that might fund them as well.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. It's more the size of the families. We did a fairly extensive review of the families on the housing register, and in terms of the necessity for physical adaptations, there's very few. We have families with larger numbers of children and children with more complex mental needs that require more space, gardens, and that's backed up by full medical evidence. So when we looked at this carefully, it's more the size of the properties and the families rather than the physical disabilities of any members of the family, whereby we would need to buy a property and then pay more money to adapt it. Clearly, over time, if we acquire a property and a member of that household then requires that, we can then look at various ways that we can adapt that, either through the Disabled Facility Grant Scheme or further Section 106 funding. But the register shows us it is the size of the families and the needs, particularly of the children, that are driving this rather than the physical adaptations.
Thank you.
Continue. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. This question is probably more aimed at Dom than Andrew, so he'll be relieved, I'm sure, at that. Just a quick one. Obviously, the proposed budget for this is 5 million, which would leave about circa 9 million left in the Affordable Housing Fund. I completely understand that we can't commit to any expenditure that we haven't physically collected as of yet, but just in terms of my understanding, have we any way of forecasting what we may receive in the future from developments that maybe haven't been built up yet, or permissions that have already been granted but may be delayed with water neutrality? Do we have any idea over the figure we may look at taking in the future? Again, I know we can't commit to expenditure, but do we have an idea of what we may be coming in the future to plan ahead, potentially with potential projects in the near future, so that we can kind of have a scope of what we might be looking at later on down the line? Thank you.
So obviously there's been a move to SIL rather than Section 106, hasn't there? So what I'm not cited on is how much Section 106 is still lurking, ready to come to us, and I would have to ask the planning department on that specifically. And the move obviously to SIL is different, isn't it? So it's less about this sort of a type of expenditure. So the answer is I can't give you an answer here, but I can come back to you with that figure. But what I would say is obviously there is still, potentially 9 odd million there that we could either spend ourselves or pass to registered providers. Something I know Head of Housing would also like to see the sort of the dual aspects here, because obviously for me, as on the financial side of this thing, is obviously if we're spending £5 million, we are at least when we're renting them out, we are getting an income from that. Obviously, if we pass it to others, we don't get that income. So this is, for me at least, any yield we can get on that is welcome.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I did actually ask the Planning Obligations Officer this afternoon, Charlotte Grant, and she sent me a table, and lurking in the wings is around 873,000. But as Dom rightly says, unless that's actually in the pocket, we can't really earmark it. But that's the forecast at the moment, Councillor Jeffrey.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, because it was more around the point of, because we've had so many permissions that have had delays because of water neutrality, COVID, anything, all manner of things. It was just more of a case in point of whether or not there was anything additional lurking in there before the system switched over predominantly to SIL. So thank you for clarifying that. Not a great deal left over there, ready to come in, but thanks anyway.
Any other questions? Councillor Hogman?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at section 7.5, and forgive me for sticking to the factual figures because I appreciate there's a human side to this as well that will be discussed on Wednesday. Am I right in thinking that these properties will deliver a 2.6, 2%, 9% yield return on investment? Because I thought we couldn't buy property cheap enough that we'd receive government funding for household subsidies. I thought property prices were so expensive in this area that we were struggling to buy property at costs high enough for the government funding to deliver return on investment. Now, if the answer is yes, it is delivering return on investment, I can equally see that we're probably getting 4% return on investment in the bank at the moment, and even if we're getting 2.6, it is actually making a net loss. But if that net loss is less than we're paying to keep people in overnight accommodation and temporary accommodation, then surely we're still onto a winner, and it's a no-brainer. So I just want to check my understanding. If my understanding is correct, then why aren't we spending the whole 9 million buying more accommodation? So several questions, but hopefully you can just explain it in more detail. Thank you.
Well, I think you've summarised it actually. Yes, overall, when you look at all the parts of the puzzle, it probably is, and this is why this is coming forward as the first, perhaps of many that we might do. But obviously, we need to try it first, don't we? We need to see whether we can purchase these at the right price. What I don't think we should do is, go out and buy really expensive properties because they're available and rush into something and overpay for something, because that's not value for money. Yeah. So we have to find the right type of property. It's got to be a property that's at the right value, but also suit the right sort of tenants as well. So it's a mixture of things in there. So yes, on the face of it, spending that individually against the cost of the capital is, doesn't give a return, but it does when you factor in fewer costs elsewhere. Although, of course, as an accountant, that's very hard to justify, isn't it? You're saving a cost that you haven't spent yet. Has that answered your question? Your second part was, should we rush out and spend the other 9 million? I would see how this bit goes first, see if it actually works, see if we get the right tenants in, can we source the properties, can we actually buy 10 of these properties? And then we'll perhaps be coming back to you to say, can we buy some more?
Thank you.
Do you want to follow up on that? No?
No, I don't think so. As you said, I think my understanding is reasonably correct. It is a lack of understanding of the hidden costs and the human element that are involved in it that I'm sure more will come out on Wednesday night.
Councillor Walters, before I start asking my questions.
Oh, do you want to ask your questions then, and I'll see if they answer mine?
No, I wouldn't be that rude. Please go ahead.
Okay, so we're going back to the size of these properties. So we're talking about 3 and 4 bedroom properties, and we're looking at people who've got families with extraordinary mental health needs. So I'm assuming it's autism, ADHD, and ASD. So my own experience is some of these children just need their own space. So it's potential that we could get a 4-bedroom house and maybe break up some of the rooms so they actually create more space, but smaller spaces for these children, and therefore accommodating bigger families. I'm just thinking that there is a cost element to that of actually redesigning the interior of the houses. So I'm assuming that will be taken into account at some point.
Yes, I mean, we'll look at each on a case-by-case basis. Not all the families have children or members of the household with special needs. Some are just larger families, and and we can buy things called 3-bed parlour houses, which means you have 2 downstairs rooms. One of those can become a bedroom. But so it's as Dom says, this is almost a pilot, really. Will this work? Will we be able to acquire the right kind of properties, not too expensive, certainly not too luxurious, but the right kind of sort of family homes that we can then accommodate sort of 10 households from the register? I noticed that Councillor Hogman said we could spend the rest of the 9 million. This is where I might deviate slightly from the section 151. I'd rather give the money to housing associations because you get a lot more bang for your buck. Because actually then you're providing grant funding to enable housing associations to deliver social and affordable rent, and then they will maintain the stock and manage that stock, and then we still get to put our families in them. But I understand his position as well. For me, it's not either or, it's both and. Any possible avenue we can get now to deliver affordable housing in a rather arid situation is what I'm committed to.
I'd like to qualify my question. I come from a family of, my mum had 7 children, 2 adults, in a 3-bedroom house with an outside toilet. So it's quite interesting how needs change, and I understand how needs change over the years. It's just the housing stock out there is quite limited for that type of conversion.
Any other questions? No, I have a few. In item 2.2, it talks about 730 individuals / families. Families are multiple. I mean, how many families are we talking about? Rather than just individual. You see, I'm just trying to get a feel for the size of the problem, is what I'm saying.
The size of the problem is extensive, Councillor. So we're seeing the number of the need for 3 to 4 bed homes going up. I'd have to go back to the analysis that we did, but we're certainly looking at so if there are 780 households on the register, then half of those are going to need larger homes. So you're looking at 300 plus, really.
That gives you an idea of the size of the problem.
I mean, it is a big problem, and if we don't see the new build or the acquisitions coming forward, then the wait on the register now for a 3 to 4 bed home is 3 to 4 years. By 2030, I think it is, and again, I'd have to check the figures. That's around 10 years.
Thank you. In paragraph 2.6, it talks about housing management implications. And basically you have 38 the local AHA, we've got 38 and then we've got 32. So we're looking after 70 houses. And presumably what we're looking for is another full-time person to take on the extra, is that right?
Yes, Chair, it is, yes.
Some of this is being funded by West Sussex County Council for a certain period of time. Presumably after that period of time, we have to fund all of it, right?
I would imagine that would be the case, yes. And I think it should take us up to when we know what's happening with local government reorganisation. But in advance of that, when we look at, and we may acquire more homes, I think that Councillor Jeffrey raised a very good point in his question. And I was pleased that this was picked up, that increasing the number of homes means you have to increase the housing management, because a number of the tenants we have, particularly if they're Afghans or Ukrainians, and certainly that the people coming into our properties do need support. They do need what we call in the trade intensive housing management. That doesn't mean it's a negative thing. It means that people need the support. And in the sector generally, there's been a retraction of housing officers on the ground that know the patch, know the tenants, can go and have a chat, can say, don't park your bin there because you're going to upset Lynn next door. Sorry, Lynn, I just saw you, but I wasn't meaning you. And because you've got that proper housing management resource, you can head off at the pass the most horrendous neighbourhood dispute that it becomes unresolvable, all because somebody parks their bin in the wrong place. If you don't believe me, I can give you some cases on that. So I was very pleased that Councillor Jeffrey picked that up, and also the Chair has, because we do need to make sure we acquire the properties, we manage them well, and we look after our tenants.
I can testify to the bin question in the local area where I live. Believe me, it's almost as bad as parking. The other question I had basically is you said that you got more bangs for your bucks if you part some of this money, the residue, well, the majority of it with local authorities, local housing, social providers. The question for me, and it's not a trick question, is can some of these funds in the 106 funding be used to help CLTs and get CLTs off the ground?
Yes.
Because that's another route
Yes.
to providing decent accommodation.
Yes, yes, Councillor, and we're working with the Chanctonbury CLT at the moment and a scheme of sort of 10 homes, which is coming through in our partnership work with Action in Rural Sussex, who are forming a housing association and need a project to start. And I'm in discussion with them about whether we can use some of the funding to help, which would be a real pioneer scheme for us in the district. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here. That's why I flagged it in, because I know of other CLTs which are struggling to get going, get the impetus. So if Chanctonbury can sort of lead the way, that would be very helpful. Any other? Oh, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to add to your point on CLTs, really. I think Andrew might be aware. I believe it's in Arundel. There's a CLT which have got. I think it's 18 homes now that they've got. They've actually constructed. So I think they're a really good example to follow. So I don't know if there's something that we're looking at using as a case study to get the CLTs in our districts off the ground, because they've been really successful in what they've done, and to actually get to 18 homes in a reasonable spate of time is remarkable in my view.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but I think there's one in Amberley, about 12, I think, isn't there?
I don't think that's a CLT. I think that's a scheme that I worked on when I was here before, so I don't think that's a CLT. But I could be wrong. I don't think we have a CLT.
I wasn't sure.
No, I don't think we have a CLT in Horsham district. We've got 3 CLTs at the moment that are very active. The one in Pulborough, one in North Horsham, and the one at Chanctonbury. And we're actively working with them and also with Action in Rural Sussex, who are supporting them to get things done.
Thank you for that. Members got any further questions? Well, thank you. That brings item 9 to a close, at least phase 1. You'll do the policy and stuff on Wednesday on phase 2. But I'd like to thank you both for coming. And if you want to stay, please do. But if you don't want to stay, quite understand that you might want to beat feet, so to speak. Thank you both. Item 10, update from task and finish groups. As it happens, all the task and finish groups migrated to the other committees. So if any members have got any bright ideas on finance and performance that they'd like to kick off with suggestions for task and finish groups, quite happy to hear them. We'll have to manage the resources, but let me know. Always happy to take them forward. So non-effectively on item 10. Item 11 is the work programme. And we've all seen the work programme. Anybody got any comments or points on the work programme, or do we take them as read? I think we take them as read then. I don't see any reaction to that. Or is Councillor Livingston thinking on it? Okay, sorry, there were signs there. I thought you might be about to say something. Next item is item 12, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan. Basically, this item is for noting the forward plan. I'm sure that it will change again, but there are a couple of interesting topics there that we might be looking at in the future. Any comments on Cabinet Forward Plan? No? Okay, item 13, urgent business. There is, in my opinion, no urgent business, so I will thank you for coming. Thank you very much for your questions. You can see that feeding in the questions beforehand allows the office to weave in some answers. And if the answers aren't woven in, you can always ask them individually afterwards. So thank you for coming and safe journey home. Thank you.